Once war breaks out, the following 10 things will happen. Knowing in advance means being prepared. The current global situation is turbulent. Many regions are ravaged by war. Online discussions about the possibility of World War III remain heated. Leaving aside distant places, just looking around us, there are plenty of potential war hotspots. To the north, Russia has been at war for 2 years. To the south, Myanmar's civil war has dragged on for months while the northeast peninsula remains tense. To the west, India and Pakistan clash from time to time. If World War III truly comes, what will happen then? First, the rich will flee quickly. Take the eve of the Russia-Ukraine war, for example. Ukrainian tycoons who caught wind of the situation planned their escape. Of Ukraine's top 100 richest people, 96 had fled before the war. Only 4 stayed because corruption charges barred them from leaving. The wealthy moved their assets abroad in advance. Once they heard war was imminent, they bought tickets or even chartered planes to escape. Many Russian tycoons also fled abroad. It's said that in just over a year of war, 15,000 wealthy individuals left. A netizen once interviewed a veterinarian in Kyiv's wealthy suburbs. He mainly treated the pets of the rich. He said that after war broke out, some rich people fled directly abroad, while others tried to reach the border for refuge. In the end, only he, the servants, and a group of abandoned pets remained, relying on each other. So, where do the rich flee to? Mainly the UK, Germany, France, Switzerland, and other European countries, as well as the Middle East. Many Ukrainian tycoons also fled to the United States. However, fleeing to these countries didn't mean they could sleep easy. Because Ukraine leans toward the West, its tycoons fared slightly better. But Russian tycoons had a worse fate. Not only were their assets seized, some were even assassinated. Even so, after war broke out, the wealthy still scrambled to leave. When disaster strikes, the flight of the rich has become a global norm. Since the Syrian war broke out in 2011, many Middle Eastern tycoons have bought property in Paris, revitalizing Paris's sluggish housing market. During the pandemic, India's wealthy also staged a mass exodus. The flight of tycoons during the Russia-Ukraine war once again proved to the world that only the lower classes are closely tied to their country. Second, financial markets will collapse. Currencies will depreciate, and assets will shrink sharply. Once war begins, investors in panic will rush to sell off stocks and other assets, while speculators will engage in frenzied speculation. This will cause violent turmoil or even collapse in financial markets. War itself disrupts economic production. Coupled with the sudden withdrawal of capital, the two combined will severely impact the national economy, causing rapid currency depreciation and worsening inflation, with assets drastically shrinking. And this is only the short-term impact. In the long term, wartime economic measures and government intervention will have far-reaching effects on financial markets. So the wealthy choose to flee, not just for safety, but also out of fear that their assets will shrink. Third, there will be energy shortages, and power and water cuts will become routine. In wartime, energy trade will be affected. War-torn areas often suffer shelling, and energy transport may even be cut off, leading to tight energy supplies. On the other hand, War consumes massive amounts of energy. First, in terms of fuel, tanks, planes, ships, and other military equipment need fuel to keep engines running. And modern weapons use high-tech fuels that consume even more. Second, in terms of electricity, beyond lighting for military bases and heating needs, modern weapons, communication equipment, computers, and more all rely on electricity. Third, in terms of water resources, troops on the move inevitably need water. During war, when oil is prioritized for soldiers, energy naturally goes first to military use. In addition, combatants may deliberately sabotage power facilities, causing power and water supply systems to collapse. For example, during the Kosovo War, the U.S. used graphite bombs to attack Yugoslavia's power facilities, causing frequent blackouts. In the Russia-Ukraine War, Russian forces once paralyzed Ukraine's power grid, causing a nationwide blackout. Then a large number of factories will shut down. Industrial production will grind to a halt. Temporary factory shutdowns are common, mainly for two reasons. First, war disrupts the country's original resource allocation. Factories will be forced to stop work due to shortages of raw materials and water cuts and lack of labor. Second, during war, some areas will suffer heavy bombing, and factories must close to ensure workers' safety. Just look at Ukraine today. With constant fighting, many factories cannot produce in peace. Next, food and daily necessities will be in short supply, and prices will soar. Food is vital to people. Once war breaks out, farmland is destroyed, and factory shutdowns will inevitably cause shortages of food and daily goods, sending prices skyrocketing. In wartime, governments often distribute rationed food to civilians, but it's wise for people to stock up on supplies in advance. You can store canned food, rice and flour. Sugar is especially important. In normal times, it's just a seasoning, but in emergencies, it can serve as a staple to sustain life. Salt is not only essential for the body, but also has certain disinfecting properties. Biscuits, high-energy bars, and other filling foods are also good choices. In addition, clean drinking water is essential. Besides storing water, you can buy water purification devices, such as portable purifiers and purification tablets. Next, medical resources will become strained, and many of the wounded and sick won't get timely treatment. War has always been a cruel meat grinder, and the Russia-Ukraine war is solid proof. The sudden surge in casualties overwhelms the healthcare system. Shortages of medicines and emergency supplies are inevitable in poorer countries and regions. The situation is even worse. For example, the current Gaza region is already facing a humanitarian disaster. Therefore, it's best to stock some common and emergency medicines in advance, such as antibiotics, anti-inflammatory drugs and painkillers, as well as disinfectants and antiseptics. Furthermore, transportation and communication will be damaged, making travel and contact difficult. War will destroy infrastructure, causing transport paralysis. Moreover, modern warfare involves communication countermeasures. In such cases, contacting the outside world or escaping becomes extremely difficult. So, it's necessary to find a shelter in advance. After that, job opportunities will plummet, and unemployment will soar. Factory and business closures will leave many unemployed, and college graduates will also struggle to find work. The surge in jobless people will burden families heavily and place enormous pressure on society. In addition, schools will suspend classes. School closures are common in wartime. War becomes the main focus for teachers and students, and many university students choose to enlist and go to the front. Lastly, public security will worsen, and crime rates will rise. With the wartime economy in decline and massive unemployment, if the situation does not improve for long, social tensions will intensify, leading to frequent serious criminal cases and threatening social stability. Another inevitable outcome of war is the creation of refugees. Looking at the history of war, whether it's a local war or a world war, it always produces large numbers of refugees. During the Vietnam War in the 1970s, many fled abroad. At that time, as the UN designated nearest refugee shelter, Hong Kong saw a massive influx of Vietnamese refugees. According to statistics, by the year 2000, Hong Kong had taken in 200,000 Vietnamese refugees. In the 21st century, the 9/11 attacks prompted the U.S. to start its war machine, launching wars in Afghanistan and Iraq in the Middle East. That lasted nearly 20 years and created a large number of war refugees. Take the Afghan War as an example. From the start in 2001 to the U.S. withdrawal in 2021, the nominal number of refugees caused by the war is 37 million. In reality, there are at least 50 million. Tens of millions of refugees and harm to civilians have made the destruction caused by the war second only to World War II. And this is just the cost of one war. In addition, there was the Iraq War, the Syrian War, and the war in Libya in North Africa. Of course, it also includes the current Russia-Ukraine war. According to UN statistics, after the war broke out, on average, 1 out of every 10 Ukrainians became a refugee. These people went to neighboring countries through various routes, creating a new wave of refugees. Where did these refugees go? Mainly to Europe. Since the Afghan War, the number of refugees flowing into Europe each year has continued to rise. The massive influx has put Europe under a severe refugee crisis. Statistics show that in 2023, 1.1 million people applied for refugee status in Europe. Most of them came from Afghanistan and Syria. The 4 countries receiving the most refugee applications were Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. Germany received more than 330,000, while the other 3 countries each had over 100,000. Why are there no Ukrainian refugees included? Because 4.4 million Ukrainians automatically received temporary protection without the need to apply separately. These refugees are legally recognized immigrants. In addition, there are many illegal entrants and overstayers. So, Europe's refugee issue actually includes these 3 groups. When it comes to accepting refugees, there are significant divisions within Europe. For example, among political parties, the right wing opposes immigration, while the left wing supports it. Among ordinary citizens, lower-class workers whose jobs and wages are impacted oppose immigration, while the elite class supports it. How is life for refugees in Europe? Or rather, how does Europe treat immigrants? Everyone knows that Trump opposed immigration. During his term, he built a separation wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. In fact, in recent years, EU member states have taken similar measures. Walls and barbed wire have become common sights at the borders. This has made it increasingly difficult for refugees to cross into the EU. Coastal areas without land borders also use satellites and drones for real-time monitoring, making entry equally difficult. To strengthen border control, EU member states have invested billions of euros. This fully reflects their true attitude. In Europe, refugees from the Middle East and Africa are not welcome. On one hand, they take on dirty, exhausting, and poorly paid jobs, and are often ignored. On the other hand, they are seen as sources of terrorist attacks and riots. In contrast, Europeans are more accepting of Ukrainian refugees. On one hand, Ukraine is in Europe and borders many EU countries. The two sides have close ties in economy, culture, and emotional connection. Especially in Eastern Europe, people in countries like Poland affectionately call Ukrainian refugees Slavic brothers. On the other hand, the Russia-Ukraine war is different in nature from wars in the Middle East and Africa. Many Ukrainians are only temporarily displaced and will return home after the war, so they will not compete with Europeans for resources and jobs. However, the refugee wave is indeed a broad and complex issue, involving race, religion, and cultural conflicts, the allocation of social resources, and job competition. Deeper issues also include whether a large influx of refugees will change a country's demographic structure and thus affect its economic structure. So, the hesitation of European countries is understandable. But perhaps what should be reflected on more is the United States, which stirs up wars everywhere.